Rome had seen perverse emperors before, but nothing prepared the city for Caligula. Imagine being summoned to the palace, knowing that behind those doors, the most powerful man in the world might decide your wife's fate, your daughter's fate, or even your own. Caligula was called a pervert, a horrible man that abused his powers. And what's most terrifying, even the darkest stories weren't rumors. They were witnessed. Here are the 5 worst sexual abominations that defined Emperor Caligula. His darkest secret with his sisters. Caligula had 3 sisters, Agrippina, Livilla, and Drusilla. After losing his parents and brothers, these 3 women were all the family he had left. They had survived the purges together. They had clung to each other while the rest of their bloodline was erased. So when Caligula became emperor, no one was surprised that he elevated his sisters to unprecedented honors. He included them in official oaths of loyalty. Their images appeared on imperial coins, something unheard of for women who were not empresses. He gave them privileges normally reserved for the Vestal virgins themselves. At first, Rome saw this as touching, a young emperor honoring the family that had endured so much. But then the whisper started. According to Suetonius, Caligula's relationship with his sisters, particularly Drusilla, went far beyond brotherly affection. The historian claims that Caligula was caught in bed with Drusilla when they were both still teenagers, discovered by their own grandmother. Rather than showing shame, Caligula allegedly continued the relationship openly once he held power, and he never hid it. At banquets, he would seat Drusilla beside him in the position reserved for a wife. He showered her with honors that made the actual empress look like an afterthought. He treated her not as a sister, but as a consort in all but name. Some historians believe he even planned to name any child she bore as his heir, a child that would have been both his son and his nephew. When Drusilla died in 38 AD, Caligula's reaction confirmed what many suspected. He declared a period of public mourning so extreme that it became a crime to laugh, bathe, or dine with family during the grieving period. Anyone who violated this edict faced execution. Then he did something no emperor had ever done before. He had Drusilla declared a goddess. He elevated her to the status of the divine, equal to the gods of Rome themselves. He established priests in her name and demanded she be worshipped. A man does not mourn a sister this way, but here's what makes this story even more unsettling. Drusilla was not the only sister. Agrippina and Livilla remained, and Caligula's feelings toward them moved from desire to something else entirely: suspicion, jealousy, and eventually punishment. Caligula had relations with his remaining sisters but did not honor them as highly as Drusilla. He later prostituted them to his soldiers as a final humiliation, before condemning them during a conspiracy trial. What Caligula did to his own sister was a private scandal. What he did next was a public spectacle designed to humiliate the most powerful families in Rome while they watched helplessly. The emperor's public humiliation events. To understand why this was so devastating, you need to understand Roman society. The Senate wasn't just a political body. It was a collection of the oldest, wealthiest, most prestigious families in the empire. These men traced their lineages back centuries. Their wives and daughters were symbols of family honor, protected, revered, and untouchable. Caligula understood this perfectly, and he wanted to show them that nothing was untouchable. According to ancient sources, Caligula transformed a section of the imperial palace into something Romans could barely comprehend: a brothel staffed not by slaves or common women, but by the wives and daughters of senators themselves. The most noble women in Rome, forced to serve at the emperor's command. But here's what made it truly cruel. He didn't do this in secret. He invited their husbands to watch. There were banquets where Caligula would survey the wives of his guests as they dined. He would walk among the tables, inspecting the women like merchandise, and when one caught his eye, he simply took her. He would lead her away from the banquet hall. Her husband would remain seated, unable to protest, unable to leave, forced to continue eating as if nothing were happening. Then Caligula would return looking disheveled, satisfied, and ready to talk. In front of the entire gathering, in front of the woman's own husband, he would openly discuss her performance. He would critique her, rate, and compare her to others he had taken. The husband was expected to sit there, smile, and even laugh along. To object meant death. To show anger meant death. To leave meant death, so they laughed. They laughed while their wives stood humiliated. They laughed while Caligula described what he had just done. They laughed because the alternative was watching their entire family destroyed. Some historians believe he even charged admission to the palace brothel, forcing citizens to pay for access, not because he needed money, but because it added another layer of degradation. Rome's finest families, monetized like common prostitutes. But even this humiliation wasn't enough for Caligula. He was just getting started. Rearranging his palace into a sex dungeon, the imperial palace had already been transformed into a brothel. Senators' wives had already been humiliated, but Caligula wasn't satisfied with isolated acts of degradation. He wanted something grander, something that would implicate the entire Roman elite in his depravity. He wanted them to participate. Ancient sources describe orgies of unprecedented scale hosted within the palace walls. These weren't private affairs hidden from respectable society. They were events, spectacles that the nobility were expected to attend, and attendance wasn't optional. Imagine receiving an invitation from the emperor. You know what happens at these gatherings. You know what you'll be expected to watch, what you might be expected to do. But refusing means arousing suspicion. Refusing means becoming an enemy. So you go. Cassius Dio describes scenes of systematic debauchery. Men and women of the highest social standing gathered together, stripped of their dignity by imperial command. Caligula would watch from above, observing, directing, deciding who would be paired with whom. Husbands forced to watch their wives. Fathers see their daughters in people's hands as they are sexually stripped, but here's the calculated genius behind the madness. Once you participated, you were compromised. You couldn't speak against the emperor without exposing your own involvement. You couldn't claim moral high ground when you had been present, when you had done nothing to stop it, when you had perhaps even joined in to avoid standing out. Caligula wasn't just indulging his appetites. He was building a system of mutual guilt. Every senator who attended became complicit. Every noble family that sent their members became entangled. The entire ruling class of Rome was being slowly drowned in shared shame. And Caligula made certain everyone knew it was happening. He reportedly discussed these gatherings openly. He mocked specific participants by name. He made jokes about what he had witnessed, about who had done what, about which distinguished Roman matron had proven most enthusiastic. Rome's elite found themselves trapped in an impossible position. Their reputations, their family honors, their political futures, all of it, was now held hostage by an emperor who had made them partners in their own degradation. By the end of his reign, half of Rome's most powerful men had secrets that Caligula knew. Secrets they would do anything to protect, and perhaps that explains why it took so long for anyone to stop him. The previous horrors had targeted families collectively. What came next was something more personal. A single act designed to destroy one woman's entire future, just because Caligula could. He targeted something even more sacred than noble bloodlines, something Rome believed not even an emperor would dare to touch. Turned a wedding into a nightmare. Roman weddings were sacred occasions. They represented alliances between families, the continuation of bloodlines, and the promise of legitimate heirs. A bride on her wedding day was considered blessed by the gods themselves. Even emperors traditionally respected the sanctity of the ceremony. The families had gathered. The rituals had been performed. The celebration was underway. Then the emperor arrived. At first, his presence might have seemed like an honor. An emperor attending your wedding? A blessing for the new couple, a sign of imperial favor. But Caligula hadn't come to offer blessings. He had come to take the bride. According to the ancient accounts, Caligula interrupted the wedding, claimed Livia for himself, and had her carried away from her own husband on what should have been their wedding night. The groom could do nothing. The families could do nothing. Rome's laws meant nothing when the emperor decided he wanted something. Caligula took her back to the palace. He used her as he wished, and then, the very next day, he divorced her. Just like that, one night, and it was over. She was no longer useful to him. But Caligula wasn't finished. A normal tyrant would have simply moved on, leaving the woman to rebuild her shattered life. Perhaps she could have returned to her original husband. Perhaps she could have found some way to recover, to start again. Caligula made certain that could never happen. He issued an imperial edict, a direct order with the full weight of Roman law behind it. Livia or Astilla was forbidden from ever having sexual relations with any man again, ever, for the rest of her life, not with her original husband, not with any future husband, and not with anyone. Think about what this meant. In Roman society, a woman's purpose was largely defined by marriage and children. Caligula had not just violated her, he had erased her future entirely. No marriage, no children, and no family of her own. She would live the rest of her days as a permanent reminder of what the emperor could do. He had stolen one night from her, then he had stolen every night that would ever follow. This was not madness. This was calculated cruelty. He wanted her to spend decades remembering that single evening and knowing that her entire existence had been hollowed out because of it. Suetonius mentions that Caligula did this more than once. Livia Orestilla was not the only bride he claimed. It became a pattern. He would hear of a wedding, attend uninvited, and take whatever he wanted. The message was clear. Nothing in Rome was sacred, but even this level of control wasn't enough to satisfy Caligula's appetite. His next obsession would target something more innocent and vulnerable, and the methods he allegedly used would disturb even the historians who recorded them. The private collection of castrated boys. Roman historians recorded that Caligula developed a particular obsession. He desired beauty. Not just any beauty, but a specific kind. Youthful, delicate, and frozen in time. He wanted to possess it, and more than that, he wanted to preserve it forever. The solution he devised was monstrous. According to the sources, Caligula ordered the collection of beautiful boys from across the empire. These were not slaves purchased from markets. Many were freeborn children, taken from families who had no power to resist an emperor's demands. But taking them wasn't enough. Caligula understood that boyhood beauty fades, voices deepen, and bodies change. The very thing he desired would inevitably disappear with time. So he decided to stop time. These boys were subjected to castration, a brutal procedure performed specifically to prevent them from maturing. Without the physical changes of adolescence, they would remain forever young in appearance, forever soft-featured, and forever frozen at the age Caligula found most appealing. The practice itself wasn't invented by Caligula. Onyx existed throughout the ancient world, but there was something different about what he was doing. This wasn't about creating servants or court attendants. This was about manufacture. He was deliberately mutilating children to create a collection of living objects for his personal use. Think about what this required. Surgeons willing to perform the procedures. Guards willing to abduct the children. An entire system of people who enabled this horror because refusing the emperor meant death. And the boys themselves? They had no voice in any of it. One day they were children with futures ahead of them. The next, they were possessions, altered permanently, stripped of any chance at a normal life, kept for the emperor's pleasure until he grew bored of them. What happened to them after Caligula's interest faded? The historical record doesn't say. Perhaps that silence tells us everything we need to know. Caligula ruled for less than 4 years. In 41 AD, his own Praetorian guards turned on him, stabbing him 30 times in a palace corridor. His wife was murdered. His infant daughter's head was smashed against a wall. The dynasty he represented was erased in an afternoon. Rome breathed again. But the question remains, was Caligula truly mad, or did he simply show Rome what absolute power, with no checks and no consequences, really looks like?